Hi, guys. Welcome back. My name is Miss Mason, and today we'll be covering the Civil War in Arkansas from 1860 to 1865. This title's chapter is Between a Hawk and a Buzzard, standard H4E5. Free to pause the video or just stop and consider them for a moment. We have covered some of these people and things that have happened before in other chapters. So think of this as sort of a review just in the beginning, but let's get into it. So, some reflection questions from the last chapter is how did people react when the Civil War started in 1861? Why was Arkansas important to the Confederate war effort in the Trans-Mississippi region, which we will cover this time, so don't be afraid. And how did the five civilized tribes respond when the Confederacy asked them to form an alliance? So I'm going to go ahead and get into that one a little bit, just so you guys know and keep it updated. But the five civilized tribes are the Indian tribes that inhabited Oklahoma during this time period, and they did side with the Confederacy simply because of alliances, and they just aligned better with them. But let's continue. How did total war and the emancipation become part of the conflict in Arkansas before they spread to the rest of the country? What kind of impact did Thomas Hindman have on the war in Arkansas? And did his actions help or hurt the Confederates overall? And how did the war affect everyday life for civilians in Arkansas? Arkansas was actually divided about whether to stay in the Union or join the Confederacy. Initially, the state voted against secession. However, President Lincoln called for troops to suppress the rebellion. Public opinion shifted. On May 6, 1861, Arkansas officially seceded and joined the Confederacy. Not everyone agreed. The Arkansas Peace Society was actually made up mostly of Union supporters from the northern counties. Many members were actually arrested or forced into Confederacy service after they were discovered to be a part of this alliance. But Arkansas quickly became a part of the Trans-Mississippi Theater, which included not alone Arkansas, but Texas, Louisiana, Missouri, and every state in the southern region west of the Mississippi River. This was completely vital for the Confederacy to supply troops and just supplies in general. But let's get into the Battle of Wilson Creek, which actually happened August of 1861. Wilson Creek was the first of many major battles west of the Mississippi fought in southwestern Missouri. Union forces under Nathaniel Lyon attacked Confederate and Missouri State Guard troops led by Benjamin McCulloch and Sterling Price. Lyon was killed in battle. Despite some Union successes, the Army had to retreat. The Confederates held the field, marking an early victory in the Trans-Mississippi Theater and highlighting the deadly cost of the war even in its first year. The Battle of Wilson Creek went to the Confederacy, but honestly, some of these battles that we discuss are a coin toss. So Earl Van Dorn was a Confederate general who led troops at Wilson Creek and later at Pea Ridge. While brave, his leadership often resulted in high casualties and mixed results. And as we can see, his fine picture is right here for everyone. But let's continue. Alrighty. And here is an actual clip and a picture of the Trans-Mississippi Theater. You can see Missouri, Arkansas, and what is going to become Oklahoma included, as well as Texas and Louisiana. But let's continue on. Alrighty. So diving into the Battle of Pea Ridge, we'll also be discussing Prairie Grove, but this one comes first chronologically. Pea Ridge, also called Elkhorn Tavern, was fought in March of 1862. Decided to control northern Arkansas and Missouri, Union forces under Samuel Curtis faced a larger Confederate army led by Earl Van Dorn, Benjamin McCulloch, and Sterling Price. Initially, Confederates' attack had some success, but poor coordination and McCullough's death allowed the Union to counter it. and win. The victory secured Missouri and northern Arkansas for the Union and showed how leadership and organization could outweigh numbers. So, as we saw, the Union won this victory over Pea Ridge, completely secured Missouri and the northern part of the state of Arkansas. So the Confederacy lost and had to fall back in the efforts leading this war. But let's discuss what total war was and how Union forces used it in order to gain an advantage and win over the Confederates. So, total war involved targeting not just Confederate soldiers or the enemy, but also farms, railroad, and supplies to break the South's ability to fight. So, basically, targeting the people, the public, basically the civilians. They would burn down farms, plantations, tear up railroads, anything that would help like the Confederacy forces. They removed and took out and just destroyed everything. Now, guerrilla warfare, in contrast, consisted of small surprise attacks, keeping the war going even after major defeats. And Thomas Hindman, who we will be talking about in just a moment, he definitely was a fan of using this form of warfare. A lot of civilians did not like him because of this, and it actually causes problems for him later on. But, anyways, continuing on. Let's discuss the Battle of Prairie Grove, which actually happened December 7th of 1862. The Battle of Prairie Grove took place in northwest Arkansas. Confederate forces under Thomas Hindman attacked Union troops holding strong positions on high ground. The Confederates first tried to break the Union left flank, but were repulsed by heavy fire. Fighting shifted to the center and right as both sides exchanged musket and artillery volleys across open fields. By nightfall, the Confederates withdrew, leaving the Union in control of the northwest Arkansas. Alrighty. And now let's discuss some of the people that we just talked about, and let's just get back into their backstory a little bit with short little quips. Samuel Curtis led the Union troops at Pea Ridge. He played a key role in these battles. And Thomas Hindman, this is after the Battle of Pea Ridge, mind you, he actually was terminated from his position leading the Confederate forces to be replaced by Theophilus Holmes, who had the nickname of Granny. He was an older Confederate general who took command after Hindman was let down. But Thomas decided that he wanted to continue fighting in the war effort, so he initiated martial law to rebuild the Confederate Army, or his section of it, and he claimed that it would restore order, but in reality, it just caused resentment from people. Martial law is basically instituting a draft in Arkansas and Confederate states to come up and fight with him, but let's continue on. Here is a picture of Thomas Hindman and Theophilus Holmes. Such lovely gentlemen, I know. Let's continue. And this is actually the battle. This is a image of the battle that we just described. Feel free to pause this here and come back to it later when studying. You will need to know the taking place of these battles, how they laid out, who won, and how they won. So I would suggest going to your textbook and actually reading that portion out. Make sure you do know because they will be on your exam. But anyways, let's go. Alrighty, so this is where we dive in. We're about halfway through the war at this point, I believe, somewhere around there. But the Emancipation Proclamation was issued in 1863, declared that enslaved people in the Confederate-held areas to be free. The war shifted into a fight not only for the Union, but also for freedom. So with the Emancipation Proclamation, it did not free slaves in the northern states, but only the Confederate held. So that's Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, Arkansas, Missouri, I believe, as well. Just places like that when you're thinking of it. And the conscription laws required men to serve in the Confederate Army, but slaveholders with 20 or more enslaved people were actually exempt. This This definitely made some poorer Southerners who still had to fight in the war excessively angry. So it basically said that if you donated 20 slaves to the war effort and you gave 20 African American men in your place, you didn't have to fight in the draft. But anyways, let's continue. Fort Hindman, which we've also known as Arkansas Post, was captured by the Union forces in January of 1863. Confederate General Thomas Churchill surrendered, giving the Union control of the Arkansas River. It was a very big turning point for the war. Massive takeover for Arkansas once they gained control of the river. But let's continue. The Battle of Helena actually took place July 4th, 1863, and led to the capture of Little Rock. The Confederate forces decided that they were going to split off, and one of them was going to attack on the left flank, and one of them was going to attack the Union forces on the right flank. And they were supposed to coordinate this attack together at dawn. And the problem with this was they had different definitions of what at dawn meant. So one of them hit earlier and one of them hit later. The Confederacy lost the Battle of Helena. So Lincoln's 10% plan, the Camden Expedition, Poison Spring, and the Year of Jubilo. So Lincoln's 10% plan was that in all of the Confederate states, after the war had already been won, Union forces had decided that the war was over, the Confederacy had lost by this point, all war efforts had ceased, but Lincoln's 10% plan was as long as 10% of the state and the Confederate states, people, if 10% of them had agreed and pledged loyalty to the Union, they could re-enter with basically nothing changed. And that actually angered a lot of Unionists and people who had fought in the war. But basically, the Southern states just re-entered the exact same as it was before. So the Battle of Poison Spring actually took place after the war had already ended. Unionists had, won, Confederacy had lost, and it was a band of black soldiers. Confederate soldiers approached on this area called Poison Spring. They had initially defeated the Union black soldiers, and the black soldiers had actually waved a white flag and given the Confederate soldiers, like, we surrender. They laid down their weapons, and the Confederate soldiers actually executed the unarmed African American people, African American men that were serving in the army, which actually angered a lot of Unionists. And because the war was already over at this point, it was a victory, but it was a ill-timed, ill-won, just all around was not good. People did not support it. But yes, and this man, David Dodd, he was actually 17, I believe, whenever he passed away. Overheard the Union discussing some, what's the word for it? War plans at the moment, and he decided that he was going to go tell the Confederacy about what had happened, and he was going to go report to them. So the Unionists actually killed him, for trying to be a spy and give the information to the Confederacy. So they took him up as a martyr because he was going to tell the good word. He was going to tell them what the Union were planning, and he became this figure for the Confederacy to just keep fighting as the war came to a close. But that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you guys so much, and you have a wonderful day, and feel free to come back by sometime. Thank you.